down to build a place that I could call my own. Ashes to ashes, you blink your eyes, it passes.
Shalom. I'd like to thank Cantor Manny Silver for filling in for me last week while I was in British Columbia visiting family. Cantor Manny provided you with a wonderful Devar Torah about last week's Parshat Shavua, Shalach Lacha. I'd like to begin my Devar Torah about this week's Torah portion, Korach, with a quote from the American author James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote, "The demagogue is usually sly, a detractor of others, a professor of humility and disinterestedness, a great stickler for equality, one who appeals to passions and prejudices rather than to reason, and is in all respects a man of intrigue and deception, of sly cunning and management." Now, I don't know what demagogue James Fenimore Cooper may have been thinking about when he wrote those words, but he could have been writing about the villain of this week's Torah portion, Korach. We're told right at the beginning of the Parsha that Korach was a man from the tribe of Levi. And the Levites, of course, were designated to be the priests, not all of them to be of the designation of high priest. That was reserved for Aaron and his descendants. So Korach was a man of distinction who served in the priesthood, but in a secondary role. And we see that he gathers 250 notables, very important people among the Israelites. Notably, there are 3 leaders from the tribe of Reuben. They are Abiram, Dathan, and On. And so they bring this mob before Moses and Aaron, and they challenge Moses and Aaron's right to lead the people of Israel. Now, what Korach does is very much in the spirit of demagogues. He seems to be someone who cares about equality. He seems to be someone who cares about the common person. What does he say? He says, "What have you done, Moses and Aaron, taking upon yourselves this position of power? Isn't it written that all of us are holy? It's not just you. We are an Am Kadosh, we're told, a holy people, and a Mamlechet Kohanim, a nation of priests." It sounds like he is interested in raising up the level of all Israelites, when in fact we know that he's only concerned with his own position of power and lifting up his own political position. And we are told in the Midrash that he has a series of arguments, each one with a grain of truth. And demagogues always begin their accusations with a grain of truth. The problem is they never tell the whole truth. So what does Korach do? He points to the tithes, the maaser, the 1/10 required from each of the Israelites from their produce. And he says, look at this 1/10 taxation. This is a worse burden than the burden placed upon us by Pharaoh. Now, what he fails to say is that a large portion of that tithe was designated to be used to help the poor among Israel, the homeless, the hungry, the dispossessed. He just fails to mention those very important details. And he goes on to mock the rituals that Moses had taught the people. For example, he says, why should we bother with a mezuzah? Yeah, mezuzah has just four passages from the Torah. In my house, I have Torah scrolls from floor to ceiling. So you're telling me that this little mezuzah that I put up on my doorpost is required, even though I have all of these Torah scrolls in my house? He goes on to criticize the commandment for wearing a blue thread, a tachelet, in the fringes. He said, you know, what if I have a talit, a prayer shawl, that is totally blue? What use would I have for one simple blue thread? And we see that Abiram and Dathan are not above using the tools of the demagogue. Demagogues often co-opt and pervert the words of their adversaries. What do they say? They say, Moses, you took us from a place flowing with milk and honey. Think of that. Egypt, a place flowing with milk and honey, when Moses had used those words to refer to the land of Canaan, where they were to end up within or after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And they said, even if this place was flowing with milk and honey, do you think we're blind, they say, to all of the corruption that's happening? Again, it's a perversion of language, a perversion or a rewriting of history. This is something else that demagogues do. Now, in Judaism, we believe in lively debate. If you've ever been to a yeshiva, you see people arguing fine points of the law and arguing loudly and passionately. If you've ever followed politics in Israel, you see that Israel is a very lively democracy in which people debate everything and argue about everything. That's what Jews do. But the Talmud, specifically in Pirkei Avot, warns us about arguments, warns us about controversies. There's two kinds of controversies. One is l'shem shamayim, which means in the name of heaven. These are arguments not out of ego, not out of ambition, but arguments, positions taken, even passionately taken, for the betterment of the community, for humanity. Then there are arguments that are only about ego, only about ambition. Those are the arguments of the demagogue. Those are the arguments that characterize this controversy started by Korach all those many thousands of years ago. So we are warned about those people who would exploit our prejudices and our passions and our grievances for their own purposes. We should always be on the lookout for those types of leaders and to avoid them at all costs. I hope you read this week's Torah portion and come to your own conclusions. Shabbat Shalom.
It's a big world, it's a small world, it's a long way from home. And where you started from, you'll return one day, but for now you roam. I walk the streets of Jerusalem, and my head is bowed. Can't let you go, can't let you go, can't let you go.